So feeling deeply relaxed in some nervous systems feels very similar to being in a dorsal vagal response. And then that triggers, right, these feelings of anxiety and panic, or can just take you straight into dorsal dissociation. And so that was very eye-opening to me. And it really showed me that there's a much more nuanced way of viewing the nervous system and how to really work with our own physiology.
Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change.
All right. Well, I am excited to be sitting down this afternoon with Liz Arch, and Liz is in a place that's kind of near and dear to my heart. She is on the windward side of Oahu in Hawaii, where she's from, Kailua, Hawaii. And I used to live there, not in Kailua, but it's one of the sections of the island that I love to go to. And I am in Boulder, Colorado, as normal. And Liz is a colleague who is both a TRE provider as well as a safe and sound protocol practitioner. We'll talk a little bit about that. She has a deep background in yoga therapy and other work as well. And I've only met Liz recently, but we connected through our mutual use of TRE, attention and trauma releasing exercises, and the safe and sound protocol. And I really love on her website, Primal Alchemy is sort of the name of her business and course for people, that she sort of bills herself as doing a polyvagal approach work, which is very similar to my own orientation and the things that we do here at Redbeard. So we met up recently, we had a conversation, and Liz graciously agreed to have a conversation. And I think we'll mostly cover the safe and sound protocol, but we'll also touch upon just polyvagal therapies in general, because sometimes they can intersect. So I think that will be a good thing for us to kind of cover today. But that's what we're doing today. But Liz, thanks so much for sitting down with me today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm very happy to be here. And I love all of the common ground that we have.
Yeah, likewise. Very cool. Well, could we just start with, I guess, kind of like background and origin story? I know your yoga training goes way back. You told me you lived in LA for a while, but then somehow you got into the specific nervous system, related work and therapeutic work that you do. And so, yeah, I would just love to kind of hear how you got to here where you are and set things up with the way you're working now.
Yeah. So I feel like many people kind of come to this work, somatic work, by way of my own personal trauma history and experiences, challenging experiences that I've been through in my life. So I've had a lot of, various traumatic events happen in my life. And it all basically culminated in me living in a very dysregulated nervous system. And I ultimately ended up with a diagnosis of panic disorder and agoraphobia, or PDA, and also symptoms of PTSD. And when I started regularly experiencing panic attacks and coupled with agoraphobia, it really dramatically shrank my world and shrank my life to the point where I was afraid to kind of leave the house. I was afraid to just do normal things like go to the grocery store, drive in a car, get on an airplane. And, for someone who likes to travel the world, all of a sudden it's just like my world got smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I really dedicated my life at that point to figuring out how I could start to heal and repair my own nervous system. And I was already a yoga teacher at this point. So I already had that in my toolbox.
Sure.
But there were pieces that I was still missing in my own kind of recovery work and nervous system repair work. And so that kind of set me on the current trajectory and the path that I'm on now, where I found, Dr. Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory, and even just really understanding how my nervous system worked on a deeper level, like just that key piece of awareness was game changing for me. And it started to then evolve into not just the work that I was doing for myself, but the work then that I was doing with other people. So I kind of transitioned from being a full-time yoga teacher into now being a full-time somatic coach, where I help people. Many people come to me that have anxiety disorders, that have panic disorder, that experience panic attacks. People that have trauma histories, people that have complex trauma, childhood trauma, people with depression. So I work with kind of a broad range of people, but it's all through kind of a polyvagal-informed lens of how can we support you in finding more balance and finding more safety within your body and within your nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, I feel like there's a common theme. I mean, for me, it wasn't through the yoga world. It was more through martial arts and then body work. But then I became nervous system curious, and I've shared that story enough on the podcast. I don't need to get too into it. But I realized, what is this? What is this autonomic nervous system? Stuff I had never heard anything about. But then I realized, hey, wow, there's a lot we can learn and know that's very meaningful at a practical level. So it's kind of a real, a light bulb moment in my own just history of understanding what it means to be a human being in a body and having a nervous system. But I hear that story quite a bit from people, friends and colleagues, and people who are more deeply steeped in the yoga world. And certainly yoga has, there's plenty of, yoga is a deep practice with plenty of emphasis on awareness and sensation. And many of those things are included. But it seems to me that more and more, the many people with a yoga background are kind of are interested to sort of look at things from the neurobiological perspective, and that can also be quite eye-opening, so to speak. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that. Like, you were already sort of deep into a yoga practice, but sounds like partly due to your own trauma and then that adding up to the panic disorder and agoraphobia, that you started kind of reaching for things, kind of a little bit outside of yoga. Could you just talk a little bit about that? I think that'd be useful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I absolutely love the practice of yoga. It is something that I still incorporate into my coaching and into my support of others. It is such an amazing, beneficial practice for me. And the one thing that I started to notice is I had always kind of heard in kind of the realm that I was in, and the teaching circles that I was in, everyone was talking about fight or flight, right? Oh, yoga is amazing for helping move people into the relaxation response, for helping people move out of fight or flight and into the relaxation response. And so that was kind of my lens. Like the first few years that I was teaching yoga was, this is so wonderful to help people move into their relaxation response, right? And get out of fight or flight. And it was almost like this, fight or flight equals bad, rest digest equals good, right?
Right.
And I know now that that's not the case.
More nuanced.
Yes, it's much more nuanced than that. And so when I started working privately with various yoga clients, I started to find that some clients in particular, when I would get them into a very deep state of relaxation, more towards the end of our practice, and they would start to move towards Shavasana, and I would start to see their physiology, their breathing get nice and deep and slow, and you could see their muscles start to relax. And then all of a sudden, some clients would have this very jarring response where it was like their eyes would suddenly pop open and it would look like they were in a freeze state or like going into dissociation. And they would almost come out of that deep relaxation into panic. And I was thinking, okay, what's happening? I'm doing everything that, I was taught. We're moving them. We're down regulating their nervous system and we're moving them into this relaxation response. So why are they all of a sudden panicking when their body gets relaxed? Yeah. And that's, I think, the missing piece that the polyvagal theory really started to fill in for me, was that we have, yes, these two branches of our nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And I kind of like to just, to in basic terms, I can think of the parasympathetic as like the brakes of a car. It slows everything down. And then the sympathetic is like the gas pedal of a car, right? It speeds everything up. And what the polyvagal theory basically shares is that the parasympathetic branch, right, as you know, has two very distinct pathways, the ventral vagal and the dorsal vagal. And so the parasympathetic nervous system can function in this beautiful, healthy, regulatory way of rest, digest, repair, and heal, but it can also be activated as a defense mechanism. It can also pull us into that dorsal vagal response, which is collapse, which is immobilization, which is like the pathway of last resort when our nervous system detects life-threatening danger. That's where many of us can go. It's our most primitive survival path. And so what I noticed is certain clients that had deep histories, trauma histories, where they may have gone at some point in their lives to that dorsal vagal place as a survival mechanism.
Sure.
When I started to help them to, consciously relax their nervous systems, it was taking them to a place that actually felt very unsafe. So feeling deeply relaxed in some nervous systems feels very similar to being in a dorsal vagal response. And then that triggers, right, these feelings of anxiety and panic, or can just take you straight into dorsal dissociation. And so that was very eye-opening to me. And it really showed me that there's a much more nuanced way of viewing the nervous system and how to really work with our own physiology.
Right. Yeah. Nice explanation of the polyvagal theory there. That's helpful, I think, for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with it. We can cover more detail around it as we keep going. But so for you, when you had that awareness, great insight that you were seeing where, as people were relaxing into Shavasana and whatnot, that sometimes this another physiological state was showing itself, often with a feeling of not safety and maybe some dissociation and all these things.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, sort of like what was your first tool? Like, is that when what was your first sort of polyvagal? Did you just do some reading, or did you start learning about the SSP? Like, what was then your polyvagal journey in terms of having some things to do to support that situation?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I started with reading. I discovered Deb Dana, who works very closely with Dr. Stephen Porges. And I think she breaks down a lot of his science into very digestible pieces. And so I
refer to Anchored. What Anchored is the newer one. What was the one before that? Polyvagal Theory and Therapy is a good one.
Yeah. So she has some great books and resources. So I started looking at a lot of her material, and then I was reading, Dr. Stephen Porges' work as well. He also has a lot of resources online, so courses that you can take. And so I started taking different courses. And then simultaneously, I was also doing my TRE certification. Dr. David Berselli has also brought in Dr. Porges on some of the advanced trainings. And so it was really wonderful to be able to be in some of those advanced TRE trainings and get to be also with Dr. Stephen Porges and
his wife,
Dr. Sue Carter.
Yeah, Sue Carter was there. Yeah.
Yes, and she's equally amazing. Totally. And so that really just kind of started to, solidify my love for all things polyvagal theory, and just took me in more of this kind of deep dive direction.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Well, so tell us a little bit about, at some point, I think you moved back to Oahu, and tell us a little bit about how your practice works now. I think you do some classes, live classes. I know you do some one-on-one work. Maybe just kind of describe who you work with and what your present way of teaching and supporting people is.
Yeah. So I used to do everything in person in pre-pandemic days. And the pandemic, I was living in California during the pandemic. And so the pandemic really shifted the way I worked, and I think the way so many people worked, and even the way, we were doing TRE trainings, right? It all had to be in person. And then because of global shutdown, we ended shifting things online. And so I slowly started transitioning my business online. And now I pretty much exclusively work online with clients. And it's been beautiful because I get the opportunity now to connect with so many different people from all around the world. So I'm working in different time zones, um, really on a global scale. And so I'm really grateful actually for that aspect of things, of having the technology to be able to work with people all over. But my current offerings, I do one-on-one coaching. So we'll meet, essentially over Zoom and do one-on-one coaching with clients. I have a lot of people again that come who are struggling with anxiety, who may be, struggling with panic, who may just be working through trying to feel safer in their bodies. They may be working through, various traumas, attachment traumas. And really, we do this foundational nervous system education and then somatic work to help support people. And then I also have, for people that may not want to do one-on-one coaching or just, may not work for them, I also am currently developing a few different courses. So I'm specifically developing an anxiety and panic course. And it's a self-paced course, and it will be at an affordable price point so people can really have all of these tools, and it will be online, right? They can go at their own pace. And then I also have a trauma alchemy course where we really go through how trauma affects your nervous system neurobiologically, and we work through it. It's an 8-week live course. And so that I've run a few different iterations of, and so that will be coming up again later this year. So I usually open it up a few times a year. And then I'm also kind of on top of that, I also am a tiny habits coach. So I don't know if you're familiar with
No, I have no idea what that is. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. BJ Fogg, he's a Stanford behavior scientist. And so I'm also kind of developing a tiny habits course as well. And the idea behind that is all of these tools and practices that I share with my clients. I was finding that, when I'm working one-on-one, they do great with the tools in the moment. We practice them together, but then they weren't necessarily keeping up with the practices. And that's really what the Tiny Habits brings to what I offer is really a scientific method of behavior change. Of how do we get people to actually use these tools and incorporate them into their lives without me there, right? Because as much as I love my clients, I don't want to see you for your lifetime. I want to give you the tools where you feel great and then you can use them on your own independently of me. Yes, absolutely. If you want to check in every now and then, wonderful. I'm here for you. But I don't want to be tethered to you forever. Right? I want to empower you. Yes, exactly. And so I found that it's a really powerful way to help people to incorporate some of these practices into their lives. It's basically the idea of titration, right? Which we talk about in nervous system system work is really small and slow. So I'm not going to give you so many things that feel so big and, because the definition of trauma itself, or one definition is anything that's too much, too fast, or too soon for your body to metabolize or to integrate. And so the path towards healing from my lens is very small, very tiny, in very bite-sized pieces where we're not stressing your nervous system, we're stretching it without stressing it. And those are Deb Dana's words.
Yeah, good phrase. And that kind of the whole slower is faster mantra as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious with because there's a lot of crossover. I too with the pandemic. I find I'm doing right now. I'm probably about 1/3 in person work, and 2/3 online. But for a while, for a good stretch, even as we came out of COVID, things had shifted a lot. And as you said, there's a lot of wonderful ways to be able to connect both through classes and one-on-one work. And it's really eye-opening to me. Just as a very brief aside, something that I'm really thankful for with that experience is, like with TRE, because my original work is as a body worker,
Yeah.
really, really natural for me originally to, when I was in terms of facilitating TRE, it was really natural for me to get to be in to do hands-on things because for most of my clients at the time, that was what we were doing is body work. And so to me, one of the big gifts for me personally from the pandemic was going through several years, both teaching certification courses online, but then also and working with a lot of clients that way. It's like my hands were tied behind my back. All I can do is see and use words instead. And so for me, this
Yeah.
whole new way of facilitating kind of came forward, but was just kind of an interesting thing. So I always kind of like hearing other people's sort of, transition as they got familiar with this way of working online. But what
Yeah.
I'm curious about for you is like, so for me, I've got some people want to come in and straight away do TRE. Some people are coming in, they straight away want to do the safe and sound protocol. Some people, they don't know what they want to do, but they know that they're, that they've come to the conclusion that their nervous system is dysregulated. Maybe they're anxious. Maybe there's some underlying health thing like long COVID or something.
Yeah.
People kind of come in different ways. And I have like a little bit my own style of kind of like, assess, kind of getting to know the person and finding out, all right, well, let's start here. And then maybe we'll layer in this piece and to sort of find what basically the course of nervous system treatment is going to be for the individual. But I would love to and I'm sure for you, there's some differing paths, but
Yeah.
I'd kind of love to hear your own version of, as you meet somebody, what are some of and I'm sure you do a lot of nervous system education. I can tell you're really good at explaining things, but tell us a little bit about kind of what a course of one-on-one work might look like with you and how you decide where to go with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I do offer free discovery calls.
Yeah.
So, people that are interested can meet with me for 20, 30 minutes. And we kind of just go over like, what are your number one goals? What are your challenges? What are your top challenges right now? And where are you and where would you like to be? And based on that call, I get a really good idea of where their nervous system's at and how I can best support, if I can support. Sometimes I'm not the best fit, right? And if that's the case, then I'll send you somewhere else. Um, but for the people that it feels really aligned for, I often, again, depending on their own knowledge and awareness of nervous system work, typically some people come with none. And some people, have heard about the vagus nerve or certain things, but they don't know too much about it. So they're very curious. And so
Mhm.
typically a first session, again, it's case dependent, but we'll start off with just purely nervous system education. So we break it down in a really fundamental way, how your nervous system works in this kind of hierarchical way, right? Again, according to the polyvagal theory. So it's
Mhm.
very polyvagal theory informed.
Sure.
And oftentimes, even just that awareness piece, like I spoke about earlier, can be really game changing for people because all of a sudden it can do many different things. First, it's like, oh, there's nothing actually like wrong with me, right? Or these are very natural physiological responses to an unnatural amount of stress that I've been experiencing.
Right.
And just that normalization can help bring
Huge.
waves of
Huge.
relief to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And through that education as well, it can also start to peel back, even in the first session, like any layers of self-judgment or shame that people may be carrying into of like, why do I respond? Why do I react a certain way? Like, why do I get so angry all the time? Or why do I can't control this, I can't control that.
Yeah.
And learning basics of the nervous system can almost be this like very, soothing balm to the soul of just this understanding. So I like to start with that just so we're speaking a common language, so we have a common ground. And then from there, I have, various tools. I may use yoga with some clients. I may use TRE. I may use the safe and sound protocol. I may do a combination of all of those things. I may use mindfulness and breathing techniques and,
Right.
other kind of vagus nerve stimulating techniques through breath work or sounding practices. And so it
Yeah.
really just depends on the individual client. But I get a very good sense of it off of that either discovery call or that very first session. And I do a pretty thorough intake of just asking questions and
Getting
getting
to know
curious.
that person and how they,
Yeah.
what tendencies do they have with their nervous system and with
Yeah.
stress?
Yeah, absolutely. And asking them too, like, what has worked for you in the past and what hasn't worked? Like, where have you gotten stuck in, you know,
Yeah.
where potential pathways that you haven't explored yet?
Yeah, very cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these specific approaches. Let's talk about the SSP and then maybe a little bit about TRE. I've covered quite a bit on the podcast, although
Yeah.
it's always fun to hear some of these, their use of it and their experience. So I do want to include that a little bit, but we haven't, this will be the first conversation where I talk about the Safe and Sound protocol. So let's touch upon that for a little bit. So let's hear your version of if somebody doesn't know what that is, and I can already tell you're a good explainer. So let's hear your if you're
No
gonna
pressure. No
explain-
pressure.
no pressure, no pressure. I'll give my version too if you want. But yeah. So so tell us a little bit about the Safe and Sound protocol, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So the way that I describe it to people is it's a 5-hour listening program where you're listening to music, specially filtered music that functions as an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator. So you listen with over-the-ear headphones, and it's 5 hours of specially filtered music that uses the acoustic portal to really start to access your nervous system and specifically your vagus nerve. So it helps to create a foundation of physiological safety for people. And it's really a wonderful intervention for me because you really don't have to do anything but listen, right? And of course I'm there to co-regulate. And if you're noticing anything that's coming up physiologically in your body, I'm there to offer grounding exercises and support.
Yeah.
But I think, sometimes other modalities or approaches can feel intimidating to people, may feel scary to people if they, have never done breath work before. They don't know maybe what they're getting into if they go into a big breath work. And sometimes like a big breathwork classes, depending on the style, can be very dysregulating and can have like people can have these like very scary out of body experiences, right? And so, and even sometimes in talk therapy, speaking about a traumatic experience can be very re-triggering, depending on where you are in your own kind of healing process.
Very much. So.
And so I really love that it is this more of a bottom-up approach where we're working with your physiology and helping, again, to create more, to help bring more balance and homeostasis to your body.
For you regular listeners to the podcast, you know that about half of these episodes focus on TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises. And I wanted to make sure that you know about the Redbeard TRE certification program, our educational platform to certify others. And we have both an online version of that I teach, as well as an in-person version of the training that my colleague Ellen McKenzie teaches in Madison, Wisconsin. My next online certification training is beginning August 3rd and 4th, 2024. That's the first of 3 modules. And the way the certification program works is it's about a 10 to 12 month program divided into 3 phases of learning, each with a weekend connected to it, and then some one-on-one work with me and people on my team to support your learning journey. TRE has been a life-changing modality for myself. It's open to people with any background. I wanted to make sure you know about the program. You can find more information at redbeardtre.com. Nice. Okay, I love it. Well, I'm going to add in a few layers. So that's very good. And I resonate with all of that. To me, the other cool thing for those of you listening who want to know, what is the Safe and Sound protocol? The other things that I think are interesting to know. So this guy's Dr. Stephen Porges that Liz has been referring to quite a bit. He's the founder of this so-called polyvagal theory. giving us this newer kind of a very useful map of the autonomic nervous system. Just as Liz was explaining, it kind of takes us from the little bit older view of that it's just fight or flight or rest and digest relaxation, and it brings in the freeze immobilization dorsal state. That's the defensive path that Liz was referring to earlier, and then it gives us even some more detail, this concept of blended states where we might be having some freeze response, but also some fight or flight response and all this and that. So very, very, but the way I think about the polyvagal theories is that it's an incredibly useful map for what's happening at the level of the autonomic nervous system at a given time period. And just as Liz has been explaining, we can learn to like tune it, know where we are on that map. And that's very useful because once we know where we are, if we're in a particular form of stress physiology, we can get better and better at A, recognizing it, and then B, kind of like knowing what we need to do to get into a less stress physiological state. So anyway, so that's kind of the map itself. But so Porges is, long career in neuroscience and neurophysiology. And I think, I don't remember exactly the SSP. I think it's roughly 10 years old. Does that sound right to you? Maybe it's a little.
Yeah, don't quote me on it.
Yeah,
I would have to go back and make sure.
Years old. And he originally, and what it was that Stephen Porges was kind of thinking about, well, what would be ways that we can influence the vagus nerve? And if you're around the health and wellness world these days, there's so much talk about vagal stimulation, like vocalizing and gargling and yoga, like so. There's it's becoming really, in a way, common knowledge that the vagus pathway is so important. But for him, what he was looking for as he developed this was what would be one good access point, because there's different ways to stimulate or to exercise the vagus nerve. And one of them is this acoustic channel, as Liz is sharing. And I think the science is a little bit cool because the science is that in our eardrums, or our middle ear muscles are in charge of applying the right amount of tension to our eardrums that tunes our hearing depending on the circumstances. And so when we're with other humans, because humans we are wired for connection, and ideally we're in safety, and we have all this biology that lets us know, like, do we think somebody's kind of a friendly person, or we're not sure, or are they definitely a threat? So we have all this kind of radar. And an interesting thing happens with our hearing, which is that when we are in what's called the ventral vagal, or sometimes called the social engagement nervous system, physiologically we feel relaxed. We're available for connection, social connection, or connection to self. But our hearing shifts a little bit because those little middle ear muscles, they tune our eardrum in the right range so that we can easily hear the tones connected to human voices.
Yeah, that middle frequency range.
That middle frequency range. But when we are in the a fight or flight, a sympathetic arousal, or in a dorsal vagal state, the tuning gets different. And one example is when we're more oriented towards threat, especially fight or flight, our listening shifts a little bit, and we're more able to hear deep sounds, like the sounds of like predators, or like trucks rumbling, like those kinds of noises, sounds put us more in that physiological
rolling
state. Rolling thunder, exactly. Those kind of like big vibration kinds of things. So the way that the 5 hours of listening that Liz described is, it's a sequence of sounds it's just regular music. Sometimes it's pop music. Now there's a version with classical music and this and that. And it's kind of regular music, but over the course of 5 hours, it's filtered in a way that it reduces the frequency range, and it sort of narrows in on the specific frequencies that help bring us into that middle state where we can really attune to the sound of human voices. And so the idea is that if the listening kind of teaches your middle ear muscles how to find that certain sweet spot, and then kind of practices it, gets them there. And then that has a shift on the cranial nerves, or the vagus nerve, and it kind of helps them. So yes, it's an auditory thing, but it's really a change at the brainstem and nervous system level. In a way, teaching, or the term Porges uses, is neural exercise, sort of exercising that ability to attune in that direction. So anyway, I just thought it would be worth kind of giving that sort of the science of it, because I think it's kind of cool.
It's really cool. It was a great, and thank you for adding that. It's something that I like to share with my clients as well, talking specifically about the frequencies
Right.
and these. So we have, right, this middle frequency range, which is associated with the human voice, which for most nervous systems is associated with like that soothing sounds, a mother's coo, again, depending on what your relationship was like with your mother or primary caregiver, but these sounds of safety.
Ideally.
Yes, ideally. And then we have the higher frequency sounds like a baby crying or like alarms, and that higher frequency is typically associated more with a sympathetic state, more of that fight or flight state. And then those lower frequencies can be associated more with that dorsal state. So we can be triggered into many, either of these physiological states just through sound. And what's fascinating for me is when one of the questions I ask people is like, how is it like, do you work at a coffee shop? Can you sit and do like work at a coffee shop? And so many of my clients are like, no way. Like I get so distracted. There's so many different sounds going on, and other people are like, that's their jam. That's where they work, at coffee shops.
Right.
But oftentimes for people with dysregulated nervous systems, all of these background noises, that's what their nervous system is picking up on. And it can't pick up on the sounds of safety of the human voice. If we're having a one-on-one conversation, they're going to be pulled off by the sound of that siren off in the distance, or that low rumble of thunder. And they're going to wonder, why do I feel so unsafe, even if I'm sitting with a person who feels safe to me, right? So, so really thanks for bringing all of that for the listeners.
Well, and then the other interesting thing is how, Dr. Porges, he initially developed it for kind of a few special use cases where his first research was to see, would this support children with autism? That was one. Because in autism, there's oftentimes that exercising that social engagement nervous system can help. So that's one area of application that he was looking at. And then also what you're alluding to it a little bit right now, but acoustic hypersensitivity, basically people for whom sounds are so distracting and irritating and preventing the ability to sort of focus because it's like overstimulating. So those were kind of like two special use cases. And he, as a scientist, he kind of picked his target audience and then tested it. It's like, okay, yes, this works as I expect. It's doing it. So, he kind of showed that it was very useful in those two use cases. But then what we've seen, it's a little bit like TRE, where it was originally focused on post-traumatic, trauma recovery, and then it broadened. Like now we're using it for athletics and meditation. It's sort of like everybody can benefit, not just traumatized people. And it's a little bit similar with the SSP, which is that it's not just those use cases, but it's showing very positive results with anything nervous system related, like things like anxiety, sometimes depression, certainly trauma, both developmental or shock trauma. And one use case I've been using it a lot with, and I'm curious if you have too, is with the dysautonomia that can come from long COVID. Is sort of, I've seen a lot of that, and SSP is one tool that's been quite useful for that kind of newly emerging sort of a thing. So anyway, so it's kind of a broad use of things now. But but maybe you could share a little bit more about like what have you seen with the SSP? Like, tell us a little bit more about your experiential work with that.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I love about it, there's many things, but that it is, as you were mentioning, it's evidence-based. And so it is based on clinical trials. And clinical trials, I believe, are expanding all the time to focus on different populations. So it started off with sensory, processing differences and autism. And I believe they have clinical trials right now that are for chronic pain. Are they doing clinical trials with long COVID? I know there's lots of case studies that are being
I've seen the
submitted.
case studies. I don't know if there's trials or not. Good question.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So mainly the clients that I work with that do the SSP fall into kind of two categories. One is people that are really, again, struggling with anxiety or panic and are experiencing nervous system dysregulation in that way.
Yeah.
Or people that are more in the dorsal vagal pathway, more immobilized, more collapsed, more towards depression, foggy thinking, like unable to really think, act, speak in the ways that they want.
Yeah.
And so I found that it's been successful at both. For people that have been kind of deeply dorsal in their physiology, it helps to shift them out, right? It's an autonomic state shifter. It helps to actually shift your autonomic state. And I found that some people clients I've worked with, specifically those who have ADHD and are just kind of like not aware of surroundings as much. And that's one of their complaints is like, if there's too much stimulation around me, I can't focus on anything, or they may not, again, just, if their relative were to walk right up to them in a crowd, they wouldn't even notice. And it's really helped with that kind of sensory processing where they have more mental clarity, they have more focus. And then it's also helped with clients that I've had who are experiencing anxiety to help create, again, more of a baseline of safety. I had a recent client who shared really profound sleep results where she was tracking her sleep and on one of the wearables that tracks sleep, and was having a sleep score that was not great and was actually creating more stress every time she would look at the sleep score. And I think it scores you out of 100. And so 100 is the best sleep score you can get. And it was like consistently in the 30s. And after we did the SSP, it jumped up to the 70s and has stayed consistent, 75 in that range. And so even just that shift is monumental and life-changing, because sleep, it really is one of the biggest things that we can do, for our health. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, those are great. The one kind of example that I want to give is so to me, what's so interesting about the SSP and my experience with it has been that it's sometimes surprising. And I had a teacher once who this was in somatic experiencing, but she liked to say that nervous system work can be sneaky powerful. And to me, like the SSP is the definition of a sneaky powerful intervention in my mind, because on first glance, it sort of seems a bit innocuous. You're listening to music, no big deal. But the kinds of state changes that I've seen with some clients has just been really dramatic. Sometimes even where we've tried some other things and gotten some, good results, but then now, we just for whatever reason, we were led to include the safe and sound protocol, and it's like a whole new layer or a whole new shift kind of comes in. So I continuously have sort of this like a little bit of like an awe and respect for the method, because it's oftentimes so surprising in its effectiveness. There's counterexamples to that too. I've had people for whom it just we're not getting as tangible of results. So that's the art of nervous system work, is that the same thing doesn't work in all situations. But in any case, but a few examples. One example that I want to speak to is I've had at least 3 or 4 clients who, this wasn't necessarily the main thing that we were working on, but a part of our work included the fact that that part of their nervous system pattern included the immobilization response, and showed up it showed up frequently as like social anxiety, like, kind of a more withdrawn, maybe even in the direction of agoraphobia, like at least in that sort of neighborhood. But that we're connecting to other people, like, when you're going shopping and things like that, was not a safe, that's not where those people would find safety. And I've had these few dramatic examples where we now go through the safe and sound protocol, and then they and I never prime this. I don't even mention it. But they start to say, it's the funniest thing. I went to the grocery store and I got into a conversation with the teller and we were laughing, and I never connect with people like that. But something about it was totally different. And so I keep hearing related versions of that, which to me is one of the sort of sneaky powerful effects. It's like, wow, it's really doing what it's supposed to in terms of turning on that social engagement capacity that, sometimes has been impaired due to stress or trauma. So that's kind of one thing where I'm still in, and how long? I think I've been using SSP for about 4 years now, but I feel kind of like new with it. Like I'm still learning about some of the sort of effects and influences that come out.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It reminds me, I don't want to misquote the actual trials, but if I'm remembering correctly, with some of the initial autism trials,
right,
eye contact is a big challenge, right, for many kids with autism. And
right,
wasn't there something like a 50% improvement in eye contact in that original clinical trial?
Yeah, the numbers are long since slipped my mind, but I definitely remember that was a key component of what they studied, how long somebody could sustain, not through how long they would sustain eye contact naturally, not being led, not being directed to do that. They that was one of the things that they measured, and they saw a huge change.
Yeah. I had another client who just kind of described it as she felt like her nervous system was always like the engine was always running and the engine would never shut off. And after completing the SSP, it's like the engine actually turns off now. So there's some stillness and some quiet space that I can actually be with and sit with. And so I love the social engagement side of it, and things that, surprising to people that they may not even connect necessarily to the SSP, but have that nervous system connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that some of your folks, if they've had a good response on the first cycle through it, do you have people who sometimes return to it at a later date or go through a second use of it?
I haven't had anyone yet go through a second use.
Yeah.
I have had people that continue to use the SSP balance. And
the after program. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that's a question that I think people have. They're like, 5 hours, that seems so short to, have an impact on my nervous system. And I think it should be mentioned that, those 5 hours can be broken down into 5 days, right? That's the shortest amount of time that you can complete the SSP, 1 hour per day in 5 consecutive days. But for many nervous systems, that might be too fast. And so we may need to titrate it down where you're listening at a much slower pace. So it could take 10 days to complete it. It could take 2 weeks to complete it, right? It's like finding that sweet spot between
I've worked with somebody where it took us almost a year.
Yeah, exactly.
We're working every few weeks, and it started out as only 1 or 2 minutes at a time. And it wasn't that, and if we had done it once a week, that would have, this is in a way an extreme example, but like literally that was the level of titration that was required. And it was interesting, by the end of the cycle, the capacity kept growing. And even though the intervention gets stronger through the 5 hours, nearing the end, the listening capacity, which was only 1 or 2 minutes early on, became 10 minutes or something much more sort of typical. But it was very interesting to sort of work with somebody so sensitive that we had to be that level of titration.
Yeah. And I don't know if you had this experience as you're guiding it, but I have some people that naturally come in very skeptical. They've tried many different things, and again, like you said, it's not a fit for everyone. For some people, they have really profound results and effects, and for other people, it's more minimal. So it just depends on the nervous system. But I do have some people that come in, they're like, I've tried so many things. I'm literally just listening to music. What are you talking about?
Right.
And then it's like on hour 3, all of a sudden they're like,
magic hour 3.
yeah, the magic hour 3. And they're like, they get really activated, but in a way, again, where they can still stay with it. Otherwise, we would pause and stop or go slower, but they're like, why do I feel like throwing my headphones at the wall? And
Yeah.
and they really start to notice like, oh, this music is actually
System
activating
mobilizing.
my nervous system.
Mobilizing your nervous system.
Yes. And so that's always, kind of interesting to notice, but when they actually feel something as they're listening. And some people, by the way, don't feel anything as they're listening. It's just music, but they still feel the results afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it can take, I think it deserves to be said, it can take up to 2 months to really feel the full effects and benefits of the SSP. And so sometimes it's exactly, the way that I work is I check in with people after a month after completing. So I give them 4 weeks and then we do a check-in, and then we do another check-in 2 months after and see where they're at. And sometimes really what happened in those 2 months on a deep nervous system level is quite profound.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, but what I was saying, I went on a tangent and didn't even finish my thought. But for anyone that's considering the SSP, there is a balance program, right? So there's the core listening program, which is the 5 hours that we've been talking about. And after you're finished with the core program, there is the balance program. And that kind of acts to maintain any of the nervous system gains that you've made during listening to the core program. And then it can also just help as an autonomic state shifter. And so it's not filtered to the same level that the core program is. But I think a lot of people, so when you were asking, have people repeated the core program with me? Not yet.
Mm-hmm.
But many people are still using the balance program. And I typically give people 60-day access to the balance program. And I may have someone come back, past 60 days and say, hey, can I have more balance program? Yes. And so I'll always give them access to it again.
Yeah.
Do you have people that have repeated it?
Yeah, a few times. Okay. And the kind of, as you say, there's this 8-week integration period. So, the rule of thumb is that you wouldn't, even if it was very effective and you got really good results, you don't just immediately do it again. The sort of minimum would be to give that 8-week period of continued sort of neural integration and things like that. Probably the fastest I've redone it is maybe at about the 3-month mark. I have people maybe who've done it on sort of a yearly basis or at a 6-month mark. That's not that isn't the most common thing, but what I found is if somebody had really potent, very clear gains from it, and then they've sustained them or they've integrated them, but they just, they might at some point say, that was really good. It feels like it might be time to go through another cycle. And so I think it can be good occasionally to revisit it, not needed in all cases, but it can sometimes just take things a step further or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if there's, life is unpredictable. And if there's a life event that happened that is extremely destabilizing,
Right.
that can be a wonderful time to redo it. And often even things like if you have a really bad cold and the sinus infection and that acoustic portal. So
Could
yeah,
use some
yeah,
support.
absolutely.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, Liz, let's wrap this up for today. There might be we didn't get too much into TRE. We might have to do a round 2 if we want to do an episode on the TRE process. But I want to respect our kind of time boundary for today. But this has been really useful hearing kind of your approach, how you're explaining things, how you structure things. I really appreciate sort of hearing the way you explain it. It's wonderful.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your experiences as well. I really love connecting always with people that are doing similar things and different things. So everything that your background brings is so fascinating and so valuable. So thank you for all the work that you do with the Safe and Sound and TRE and
No.
all of the other things as well.
We'll keep comparing notes, even offline, as we move forward with it. But yeah, and so we'll put your website and information in the show notes below. People will easily be able to find you. You mentioned a course you do several times per year, a live 8-week course. Do you know when the next one is opening in case anybody's interested in joining you for that?
Yeah, so I will open the next 8-week course for trauma healing, likely October, so fall, and hopefully my anxiety and panic course will be out within the next 2 months. That's my goal. I've been working diligently on getting everything up and running, but I'm really excited for that to launch because that's probably the number one reason that people seek me out is for anxiety and for panic.
Great. All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz.
Of course. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.